do have members of the Austin Fire Department and then members of command and executive staff for the Austin Police Department. As I do in all of these briefings, the information that I'm providing right now is preliminary and may change based on additional evidence that comes to light, but I'm providing you at least an update right now so that you have an understanding of the initial information that we have. Beginning at about 9:16 this morning, at 9:16 a.m., officers as well as Austin police officers as well as code enforcement officers responded to an address in the 10600 block of Pinckney Lane serving a search warrant for a nuisance abatement at that residence. They attempted contact at the door, left a copy of the search warrant, and members of, or at least contractors that were working for code enforcement began to do lawn work on the house. A short while later, at approximately 10:21 a.m., one of our officers over the air, over the radio, indicated that shots had been fired at them from someone inside the house, and they immediately backed off. They got all of the staff that was working on the house to safety, and a SWAT call was initiated for a barricaded subject. They were attempting again to talk to the subject, and the subject was not being responsive. At approximately 10:43 a.m., SWAT arrived on scene along with mental health officers as well as a crisis negotiator. At that point, further de-escalation techniques were attempted to try to get this situation under control without any further escalation. And for several hours, the officers attempted to get in contact with the individual that was inside the house. They were using, for the main part, the public address system because they could not make contact with him in any other way, and were unsuccessful. Shortly after their arrival, Kiker Elementary, a local elementary school, was placed on lockdown out of an abundance of caution to make sure that we kept our children safe in the area. And as I said, SWAT spent the next several hours trying to negotiate with the individual to just simply come out of the house. Several hours later now, at 3:19 p.m., officers were in the back of the residence and they began to take gunfire from the suspect. There were several shots that were fired at the officers, and because of that immediate threat, the front of the house, they made entry using a robot. The robot could observe inside the residence that a fire had been started and was beginning to spread quickly throughout the house. More gunshots were heard at that point. It was unclear exactly where the suspect was and where he was firing, whether that was towards the front or the back of the house, and officers maintained their distance at that time. For the next 20 minutes, officers continued to try to have the individual exit the residence through their use of the public address system. And at this point, they could see that the house looked like it was fully engulfed in flames. Thinking that it was likely that the individual had succumbed to the flames and the smoke, the Austin Fire Department was brought forward onto the street to try to begin using their capabilities to put the fire out. At that time, at approximately 3:39 p.m., the suspect, the garage door opened and the suspect stepped out of the garage with weapons in hand. And at that time, a SWAT officer shot and struck the resident, who went down with a gunshot wound. Officers continued to try to see about getting this person out of the house, and they approached and ultimately separated the suspect from his weapons and pulled him away from the house, which, as I said, was fully engulfed in flames. They began life-saving measures on him prior to him being transported to the hospital. During this time, fire department began fighting the fire, trying to contain it to the one house and make sure that it did not spread to other houses. As I said, he was transported, the subject, to a local hospital where he was pronounced deceased at 4:01 p.m. The fire was finally put out by the Austin Fire Department, and this is still an active crime scene. Once we knew that the suspect was in custody, and we have no indication that anyone else was in the house, the lockdown on the schools was lifted, and at this time we don't feel that there's any ongoing threat to the neighborhood. The officer involved is a SWAT officer who's been with our department for 8 years. As is our standard protocol, he'll be placed on administrative duty pending the outcome of the 2 investigations that will take place. A criminal investigation will be conducted by our Special Investigations Unit, working with our local district attorney's office, as well as an administrative investigation that will be conducted by our Internal Affairs Division with oversight from the Office of Police Oversight. This was a multi-agency response. The Austin Fire Department, Travis County SWAT, Travis County Constables, and as I mentioned, our code enforcement were all involved in this, and ultimately we're all a part of making this scene safe and containing it to the one house. The fire department is going to maintain apparatus on the street for some time, continuing to make sure that the fire does not spark back up. And we're just going to ask people to stay away from this area for a little while longer as we continue to contain the scene and ultimately scale down the scene. I want to thank all those partners that I mentioned. There's not a lot more information that I can provide at this time, but I will take a few questions.
Is there any danger of other munitions that might be stored in the house that could be set off by the fire? Or were there any set off by the fire?
It's unclear at this time whether there were munitions that were set off by the fire or not, but that will be something that they'll be looking for as they go forward clearing the house.
And Chief, I don't know if you can address this. Did he say anything when he opened the garage? Did he say anything when he fired any of those shots to any of the responding officers?
I don't have any information to provide on that right now.
And are you able to provide his name yet, or are we still waiting to contact?
No, we'll need to go through our contact of next of kin and our normal procedures on that.
Can you define the nuisance abatement that you mentioned at the very beginning? The nuisance abatement?
What about it?
Can you define it? Like, what does that mean?
So
Was that an
essentially,
ongoing situation?
it was an ongoing situation with the code enforcement department regarding overgrown lawn, both in the front and the backyard, and they were there to make sure there wasn't further safety considerations for that house, for other houses, and to go ahead and mow the grass.
So to clarify, did he shoot at the officials cleaning the lawn, or did he shoot inside his home? And that's what they heard.
The indications, at least initially, is that he was shooting out of the house towards them. There is some evidence to that effect, and then I'm sure that we'll figure out whether he was shooting inside the house as well.
So this man lived in the house, or was he a squatter or something?
It appears that he was a resident in the house.
Was anyone else injured?
No one besides the individual that I described was injured in this incident.
Last question.
Had Oakland called out several times prior to that? What led to them actually going out, mowing the lawn, and what was the previous history?
Yeah, I don't have all the history, and code enforcement may be able to speak to that a little bit more later, but my understanding was an ongoing situation. This was not the first time they had been out here, and ultimately led to them getting a search warrant for the residents. Thank you all very much.